wish it were true, but I'll pretend it is. We'll begin. Let's see. My talk tonight is the body of God. It sounds pretentious, and it is pretentious, but I hope we'll have a lot of fun with it, actually. As serious and as overpowering as it sounds. It's going to be a fairly simple argument, but that's what I like to do. I'm going to start with a couple of axioms, and then we'll follow with many more axioms and see where they lead us. This is something that occurred to me regarding a course I'm teaching online about religious history in relation to human history. And of course, we believe as Baha'is that human history is promoted and incited by the appearance of successive revelations. This goes like this: complexification based on fallacy leads to chaos. Now, what do I mean by that? The example I give is the Ptolemaic view of cosmos, which was very useful for a while. And the Ptolemaic view of the cosmos was the cosmos was the solar system. And the solar system was believed to revolve around the Earth. Earth was the center, and all the planets and the sun and the stars revolved around the Earth. It was kind of a self-centered view, but it seemed to make sense, and it worked for a while. But the more we observed, the more information we got, the more it became so complex that it became unwieldy. And we see this with past revelations that had no enduring covenant, especially as regards successorship, institutional design, and preparation for transference of authority to the next manifestation. The more complex the religion became, the less stable it became, and the more susceptible to petty quarrels, internecine struggles for power, incoherent doctrine, and baseless man-made legalism. Legalisms, plural, that should be. So, in other words, when the religion gets away from the central truth and is not guided, it becomes more complex, but it also becomes more fallacious and chaotic and ineffective. Complexification, however, based on truth leads to simplification. So you take all of the data that those observers of the heavens had collected, and you have someone like Copernicus who says, why don't we look at this from another point of view? And you'll see that it's not so complex. So his view that try and look at the cosmos as if the sun were the center of our solar system. And then you'll see that all the complexity that we had come up with is resolved. This is the same thing that happens if you use the mizan, or the standard or overlay of the Baha'i view of history on human history. You'll find that you get, if you study history, you find that you can get so entrenched in minutia that you lose any sense of order or purpose or organizing force. Then you overlay on all that fact the view that Baha'u'llah finally explains in complete form what Muhammad and all the manifestations had partially explained, but now we were ready for the complete explanation, namely the idea of progressive revelation. You overlay that and you see, oh, the religions are one. It's one religion revealed in progressive and successive stages. So with the advent of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the more immersed we become in the details surrounding the confusion in the history of the world. Let's see, the host spotlight there. Okay, it's something got in the way there, I couldn't see. The more we come to embrace and delight in the simplicity of the paradigm set forth in the authoritative Baha'i explanations regarding why past dispensations declined or went awry, and what safeguards are provided to prevent the same degeneration in the future. So in other words, if we look at history through a Baha'i lens, or through the lens of the theory of progressive revelation that Baha'u'llah has not introduced, it was already extant, but has given clarity to, suddenly all that complexity is made quite simple. And we know how much of the minutia we just don't need to get involved with. So you could study, for example, the history of Islam, and you could go a lifetime and never understand all of it. But if you overlay the Baha'i concept of succession and what was supposed to happen, you see it becomes very easy to understand what happened. This is the law of parsimony that we're talking about in general, and that is the simplest answer is most likely the correct answer. It was called Occam's razor because William of Ockham first articulated well this concept, that axioms based on reality and truth cut through the morass of sectarian legalisms and petty struggles for power that caused the decline of simple truth that the founders of religions revealed to counteract what followers of the previous manifestation had done to the logical unfolding of God's plan over time, even as the present complexification of nationalist social systems now requires the simpler and more encompassing logic of a global polity. So if we try to have a working order, and I talked about that in the last presentation I did for you, Dr. B, if you remember, when we looked at that wonderful statement by Gorbachev, where he said what we need is a global governance and global systems, because we've become a global community. And without it, we're going to have a whole lot of little elliptical orbits like the Ptolemaic system did that don't work because they're self-contained. One principal verity and a starting point for our argument, and that should be our, not out argument, that we're going to look for God's body. The spiritual world is like unto the phenomenal world. Now, this is a quote of Abdul Baha. It's one of my favorite quotes, and it states in another way exactly what you read as the reading in the opening, which was one of my favorites, that the real world is the spiritual world, and this world is only its shadow stretching out. And it was one of the first things I wrote about as I attempted to become a writer about Baha'i scholarship. The spiritual world is like unto the phenomenal world. They are the exact counterpart of each other. Whatever objects appear in this world of existence are the outer pictures of the world of heaven. Now, this is not so derogatory. In other words, on the one hand, the quote that was read at the outset seems to disparage any attention or love we might have of things physical. It's only illusion. The real world is to come. And yet, this too is an expression of God's creation, and a necessary expression, and one that he thinks important enough as a training tool that we should go through it if we are to prepare ourselves for the real world. So if you will, this is our embryonic experience in the physical world as we prepare for our true birth into the spiritual world. Now we get into the idea of what do we mean then when we talk of reality? If we're saying the real reality is the spiritual world, and this is only a Platonic expression or a shadowy expression of that world, then is this part of reality or not? Well, if you are going to be strictly accurate, you have to say that the term reality, if it's appropriately and properly used, means everything that is. All that exists is real. Now, some of it may be more important than the other. This reality may be a shadow of the other reality, but it is part of the totality of what God has created. The kingdom of names is called the kingdom of names because it contains the names, the spiritual attributes of God reflected in it. Reality may include various dimensions, two of which we know a little bit about, the physical and the metaphysical. However, this assertion flies in the face of current notions of a multiverse. I don't know why you'd say a multiverse, because if it's a multiverse, you think we'd be multiverses, but we'll let them have their way. They being whoever comes up with ideas such as this. And if I sound disparaging about it, it's because I think it's kind of, if you'll forgive me, a loony concept, each one of which would necessarily require its own deity, but only if one accepts that there is a creator to begin with that would require for that creation. In other words, if you're talking about multiverse and you're talking about separate creations, in which case you'd have to have separate creators or a creator. Oh, never mind. The idea is simply reality, as the term is meant to be used, implies everything that's created, no matter how many times it may seem to replicate itself. The possibility of an infinitely expanding social expression of spiritual virtues then comes to the fore. We began, of course, as Shoghi Effendi says, with the concept of the family, the neighborhood, and we were returning to that at the advice of the Universal House of Justice, because we know that's the building block of any society. And then we expand our vision of who we are, of ourself, our definition. We are a member of a tribe or a village, which might have a council and some form of governance. And then we have the city-state, which has some constitutional form of governance, something that Muhammad instituted with the Constitution of Medina. You have the nation-state as a larger expression of self, something we seem to be stuck in our present discourse, or at least some of us are, Baha'is are not, and subsidiary institutions that support that nation state, such as alliance and some form of ecumenism, so far as religion is concerned. I could go into long discussions about attempts at ecumenical councils, such as the World Religious Conferences and so on. And then finally, of course, Baha'u'llah brings about says for us, we are now ready for a planetary state or a global governance. But could we go beyond that? Could they be interplanetary alliances and beyond? Well, we clearly aren't ready for it because we don't have the vehicles ready to do that, though we are going to try to go to Mars, presumably. Now, I want to go very quickly through a series of books I have written that deal with this expanding concept of the self, and for a reason that will become apparent. I began some years ago in 1977 with this book called The Metaphorical Nature of Physical Reality, which, as the title implies, is a discussion of exactly what the introductory reading for tonight's session stated, that our purpose in this life is to discern the spiritual meaning underlying our physical experiences, that's why God put us in this physical environment, even though it may be preparatory and illusory in some sense. It's still essential for our progress if we know how to discern the spiritual lessons that it contains. And so one of my favorite passages from the writings of Baha'u'llah that sort of is the thesis for this book says, "Know thou that every created thing is a sign of the revelation of God. Each according to its capacity is and will ever remain a token of the Almighty. Were the hand of divine power to divest of this high endowment all created things, the entire universe would become desolate and void. In other words, everything in creation has something to teach us if we are sufficiently studious and discerning to discover it. I then wrote The Purpose of Physical Reality, which is similar but more expansive and gives a more ample discussion of, okay, everything is metaphysical, but how do we use it? And this gets into matters of justice and preparation for the afterlife, and more importantly, the relationship between what we do here and what happens to us there. And so this quote from the book says about as simply as possible what that more expanded view is attempting to discuss. The justification for essentially spiritual beings, namely us, taking their beginning in a physical environment is that physical reality, as the initial stage in the endless journey of the human soul, is a precisely devised classroom whereby autonomous transformation is initiated and assisted as a preparation for birth into a spiritual existence. After that, I realized that this is all well and good, but that this process of using this experience to acquire spiritual virtue is impossible by yourself. And this is where I wrote The Ascent of Society. And what this is about is the fact that, and I'll just go right to the quote, most individual spiritual growth cannot take place in solitude, because the array of virtues and attributes that constitute the good person, the noble person, and are indicative of and conducive to spiritual development require and derive from the nature of our interaction with others. The good person manifests and develops the attributes of goodness by behaving in a noble way in human relationships. Otherwise, goodness is totally theoretical. So in other words, if you have a Sufi or a mystic of any denomination or any religious creed, a hermit or an ascetic, they spend their time without talking to others in prayer and meditation and so on. But they're not really tested. They haven't really exercised those attributes. And so they're only theoretically in possession of those attributes. The best example I always give, and it usually gets a big laugh for the parents in the audience, is that let the hermit try to raise a child or two, and let's see how calm and cerebral they are. In other words, you have to exercise the virtue in a social context. Most virtues, there are some that are totally internal, but most of them involve our connection with others. Finally, the most recent book I have written, well, let me turn that off. Excuse me. God's Plan for Planet Earth. This came out just a year or so ago. And this does a lot of things, but for the most part, it talks about the universal house of justice plan for preparing for the lesser peace or for a global society through the framework for action that has been developed over the last 2 decades. The quote I have chosen that I've taken out of the book that describes what this book attempts to accomplish is from The World Order Baha'u'llah by Shoghi Effendi. And this is a very, very profound quote. The emergence of a world community, the consciousness of world citizenship, the founding of a world civilization and culture, all of which must synchronize with the initial stages and the unfoldment of the golden age of the Baha'i era, should by their very nature be regarded as far as this planetary is life. Now notice the limitation. As far as the planetary life is concerned, as the furthermost limits in the organization of human society. Though man as an individual will, nay, must indeed, as a result of such a consummation, continue indefinitely to progress and develop. In other words, the world order of Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i administrative order, which is, as the Guardian says, the most sufficient model for what this is going to look like. The design of the golden age of Baha'u'llah is the best you can do. That's the best design you can get. You can refine it as we will and polish it even as the individual. There is no end to individual development. But insofar as structure is concerned, that's it. That's just, you can't get a better structure than what we're going to have come forth in the golden age when the most great peace emerges. Which means, since that's going to happen within the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, that we'll have more than 4 billion years to play with it, to improve it, to polish it, to refine it. And then finally, there's a book called The Body of God, which, as Dr. B observed, I haven't written yet. So, sorry. But we can look at some of the ideas I have about what such a book might attempt to do. First, let's ask the question, can there be human unity beyond the planetary level? In other words, maybe the planet and the planetary level is as big as we get. Just in the same way that a human being can never become anything other than a human being. We can develop infinitely, and we will in the next world, but we will always remain, the writings say, a human soul. Well, maybe a planet is as big as a human society gets. My contention is that that's not so. And this is from a Pilgrim's Note, which of course has only some value, but the same thing is repeated in a number of Pilgrim's Notes and also in a letter from Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi, was asked if interplanetary unity would be the goal of future dispensations, or if it might be achieved in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. He answered it would be a goal of the future, but science is developing so fast that it was difficult to know how soon it would come, but it might at least soon be possible to observe life on other systems that are in various stages of development. And this is very important for a reason I'll explain in a second. Some lower and some higher than ours. Now I say it's very important, this last part, and it is to me because I've often thought that if I were in a more advanced civilization, say a planet that had already achieved a golden age, insofar as their own most great peace, and were in various stages of development after that, the last thing I'd want to do is to come to a planet in the midst of learning what it has to learn in order to realize the kind of structure it must bring about. I wouldn't want to interfere with that in the same way I wouldn't want to interfere with a child's education and say, no, look, forget that. Look, here's what you're going to be. And so look at what college is like and so on. No, you've got to go through that learning process. So in the same way, if we come across a planet and they're in some sort of stone age or so on, there wouldn't be much we could do, nor should we do, to try to bring them from there to where we are, because they've got to go through the process of organic development. So here's another axiom that's very important that we pile on top of this one. So far we've gotten the expansion of human social development is, as far as we can tell, without limit. Or at least there's nothing in the writings to indicate that there is a limit. irrefutable logic underlying this theory that humankind has always existed. Now, this is very important. Of course, it's pretty obvious. But let's look at the authoritative text and how Abdu'l-Baha states it, because it's a delightful way of putting it across. By the appearance of the spirit in the physical form, this world is enlightened. Now, this axiom is sort of prefatory to the main one. As the spirit of man is the cause of the life of the body, so the world is in the condition of the body and man is in the condition of the spirit. In other words, humankind is not only the fruit of creation, we are the animating spirit of the creation. If there were no man, the perfections of the spirit would not appear and the light of the mind would not be resplendent in this world. This world would be like a body without a soul. Isn't that a wonderful analogy and so informative? And we could talk about that for several hours. But he goes on where he expresses this axiom more directly and clearly. The reflection of the divine perfections appears in the reality of man, so he is the representative of God, the messenger of God. If man did not exist, the universe would be without result. For the object of existence is the appearance of the perfections of God. Now that's sort of a replication of what he just said, but then he goes on, therefore, it cannot be said, there was a time when man was not. All we can say is that this terrestrial globe at one time did not exist. And at its beginning, man did not appear upon it. In other words, we have been in existence for a short time, relatively speaking, to the age of the planet, which is some 4.5 billion years old. And so we know at the beginning, there wasn't mankind on this planet. But if mankind is the fruit of creation, then mankind has always existed. Ergo, there must be other planets. Ergo, human life has existed, not other planets, human life on other planets. Ergo, human life has existed on other planets. It's a necessary conclusion that you draw if you accept these premises that Abdu'l-Baha has set forth. So this gives us again a progressively expanding sense of the concept of physical reality itself. And now we see not just, well, isn't it beautiful? Because there's so many beautiful stars. And if you look in the night sky, you realize the vastness of creation, and it can make you feel either lovely and part of something incredible, or it can make you feel minuscule and unimportant. Hopefully it will be the former. So we begin again with, we started with the tribal, then the city-state. Well, if we look at the world points of view, you have, for example, the Mediterranean world, if you're living in the Judeo-Christian era, and largely in the Islamic era also, which expanded, of course, later after hundreds of years into the Middle East and so on. The global concept in the Ptolemaic perspective expands that. The heliocentric perspective, we talked about that. The galactic perspective with other solar systems. So we see ourselves as part of the Milky Way galaxy, as we call it. Though probably it's a name that we can't copyright, because I presume other planets also look at their galaxy and say, looks like a Milky Way, doesn't it? And well, we won't get into that. Galactic clusters. We now know that there are clusters of galaxies that rotate themselves, that they are a system. So there's not just galaxies, there's not just solar systems, but solar systems and galaxies in clusters that have an organic structure. Numberless galactic clusters. A Baha'i view of an infinite but organically unified cosmos. And this is another part of this axiom. That while we infer, at least I infer, and again, these are all my ideas derived from reading the text, you may derive completely different ideas or disagree with any part of it or all of it. But what I infer from the numerous times that the writings talk about the numberless stars, and the endless universe, I think that it's true, that it is endless. But this doesn't stop it from being organic and coordinated. So just for your pleasure, I put these together, the Ptolemaic model. So here we are in the Earth and the Ptolemaic, there's our point of view. Then we go to the heliocentric, where we are, where are we? Oh, Earth, there we are right there. Couldn't find us. It's going to be harder as we go along. Then the galactic structure, this is the Milky Way. Isn't it beautiful? But where are we? Well, we're somewhere about here, all right? These are galactic clusters, 5 of them, all right? Excuse me, these are 5 galactic clusters. These are galactic clusters, but these are ones you can barely see, and these are pictures of them up close here that are not discernible because the resolution isn't great. But I mean, again, we get this, we think we found the totality of reality, and then we have to expand our vision and expand it. This is a nice thing I found. The sun has a little over 22 more orbits left around the Milky Way. So in other words, even as we rotate around the sun, so the sun and the solar system is rotating around the Milky Way. And it says it will only have 22 more before it runs out of fuel. Each orbit takes 225 million years. Isn't that something to think about? So we may think, oh, geez, we've only got 22 orbits left. But again, that's 4.5 billion years. Oops, I did that again. I've done that before. Hold on. So we needn't worry that, I'm not worried, but I'm 80 years old. So for 4.5 billion years, my children will still be here. So we can be happy about that. Also, in spite of believing in infinity, as I say, we also believe that the universe is not only organized, which we'll get to in a couple of slides, but we believe in a personal God. Now, this is something very important and special to the Baha'i concept of the unity of science and religion. We don't disdain science. We don't see a belief in a spiritual reality as part of the totality of reality as contrary to a study of the cosmos, rather than it reinforces this in a sense. Now let's look at what the Guardian says, how he defines what we mean by a personal God. Because on the one hand, it means we pray to this God and we believe this God hears our prayers, though we may think that we find more comfort sometimes in praying to the manifestation or praying to God through the manifestation, because we have a personal relationship there. What is meant by personal God is a God who is conscious of his creation, who has a mind, a will, in other words, is a cognitive being, a purpose, and not, as many scientists, materialists believe, an unconscious and determined force operating in the universe or operating the universe. To say that God is a personal reality does not mean that he has a physical form, which would seem to contradict my whole discussion tonight, or does it in any way resemble a human being? Or does, not it, but doesn't resemble. To entertain such a belief would be sheer blasphemy. And of course, illogical as well, which blasphemy usually is. In the Book of Certitude, you have this somewhat troublesome thing, in the sense that if our purpose is to know God, I may seem to be wandering away from the body of God, but I'm not. At least I hope I'm not. The Book of Certitude proclaims unequivocally the existence and oneness of a personal God, unknowable, inaccessible, the source of all revelation, eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, and almighty. Now notice I've highlighted unknowable and accessible, because if our daily noonday prayer says that our purpose is to know thee and worship thee, how can we know something that's essentially unknowable? Well, of course, know thee doesn't mean to know the essential reality. Here's the key word. It's used often in the Baha'i writings, and you need to pay attention to it. The essence of you is your soul, and you don't understand it yet. You will never understand it completely, we are told. But we know it exists because we can test that theory out too, which we can do in another presentation. But we can still know about God. For example, the manifestation is the perfect mirror and the incarnation of godliness. And this is from, of course, the Suri Hakel, the tablet of the Surah of the temple. O living temple, we verily have made thee a mirror unto the kingdom of names, that thou mayest be amidst all mankind, a sign of my sovereignty. And since the speaker is something above or other than Baha'u'llah, we presume, and once we know, read that whole tablet, we realize it's the maiden who is the symbol of the Holy Spirit speaking to Baha'u'llah in the Siyachal. And so my sovereignty means the sovereignty of the Holy Spirit of God. A herald unto my presence, a sumner unto my beauty, and a guide into my straight and perspicuous path. Now, the manifestation is not only a means by which we could know God. Knowing the manifestation, and of course we don't mean in a personal relationship in the normal sense, but becoming close to conversing. Some people who are not Baha'is ask, well, how can I know if Baha'u'llah is who he says he is or who you say he is? And one of my responses sometimes is talk to him and see what he says. Read what he says, get to know him. Don't judge him on the basis of hearsay. That would be a blatant prejudice. And so Christ states this statement that has unfortunately led to some Christian chauvinism. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. If ye had known me, ye should have known my Father also. And from henceforth you know him and have seen him. So Christ says exactly the same thing. If you know me, if you've entered my presence, effectively you have entered the presence of God. But of course, every manifestation can say that and does say that. And while during their dispensation, it's absolutely true. Now, this is the first paragraph of the Kitab-i Aqdas, and most of you familiar with it, but suffice it to say, it describes two duties incumbent on God's servants, in other words, every human being. The first duty is the recognition of his manifestation, the recognition of him who is the dayspring of his revelation and the fountain of his laws, who representeth the Godhead in both the kingdom of his cause and the world of creation. So that's the first duty. It behooveth everyone who reacheth this most sublime station, this summit of the desire of the world. Wait a minute, what did I leave out? Oh, good. What did I leave out? It's supposed to be, we're supposed to follow the, let's see, whoso deprived thereof gone astray. Oh, here we go, sorry. It behooveth everyone who reacheth this most sublime station, this summit of transcendent glory, to observe every ordinance of him who is the desire of the world. These twin duties are inseparable, neither is acceptable without the other. And as I discuss in a couple of my books, they are reciprocal and they expand. The more you know the manifestation, the more you're able to implement that understanding in action. The more expansive your action, the more you understand, and that reciprocity increases exponentially. So these two duties, to know, recognize the manifestation, and once you recognize him, to do what he says. By attaining, therefore, to the presence of these holy luminaries, the presence of God himself is attained. From their knowledge, the knowledge of God is revealed, and from the light of their countenance, the splendor of the face of God is made manifest. So not only can we know God, we can enter his presence spiritually, not physically, but that's more important than physically. Therefore, whosoever in whatever dispensation hath recognized and attained unto the presence of these glorious, these resplendent and most excellent luminaries, hath verily attained into the presence of God himself and entered the city of eternal and immortal life. But what about entering the presence of God in the next life? Is it possible we will see God's body then? Well, of course, there are no bodies in the next life. And the Guardian says this very profound statement: we will have experience of God's spirit through his prophets in the next world, but God is too great for us to know without this intermediary. The prophets know God, but how is more than our human minds can grasp. We believe we may attain in the next world to seeing the prophets. So that's nice. We will see the prophets, of course, not their bodies, because again, there will be no corporeal reality there, but we understand what is meant. So have we come to a conclusion? Is the manifestation effectively the body of God? Some of what we've read seems to indicate that. To the extent that godliness can be expressed in terms understandable to a human being, but not in any literal sense. To imagine the body of God, we must contemplate something that should not be there, something more expansive, encompassing than progressive spiritual evolution of a single planet. So we're kind of picking up where we left off a few slides back. If God is eternal and infinite, if material creation is a perfect counterpart of spiritual realm, then infinity in time, space, and plenitude must also be axiomatic. This does not mean there is no organic form and functioning to this unified infinite reality. Ultimately, there are not two realities, but a spiritual and a physical reality, but rather at least two dimensions or views of a single organic reality. Therefore, should we not learn to embrace infinity rather than fear it, or be repelled by its possible existence? Math itself acknowledges its reality. You just keep adding one on top of any other number, and you do that infinitely, and you'll find there's no limit. And this is a statement to that effect by Abdu'l-Baha. This limitless universe. So he's saying you can accept that in some way as being metaphorical if you want. I take it quite literally. But he says, even though it's limitless, it's like the human body. It has an organic structure to it. It has a coherence. This limitless universe is not just limitless. It is like the human body, all the members of which are connected and linked with one another with the greatest strength. How much the organs, the members, and the parts of the body of man are intermingled and connected for mutual aid and help, and how much they influence one another. In the same way, the parts of this infinite universe have their members and elements connected with one another and influence one another spiritually and materially. So everything in creation is connected. On the earth, we see it with what was called the chain of being, and we see it in the universe with what we just saw with another chain of being quite beyond what we've understood up till now. So creation as an image of God. This is sort of the culmination of my point. The whole universe reflecteth his glory, while he is himself independent of and transcendeth his creatures. This is the true meaning of divine unity. He who is the eternal truth is the one power who exercises undisputed sovereignty over the world of being, whose image is reflected in the mirror of the entire creation. All existence is dependent upon him, all existence. And from him is derived the source of the sustenance of all things. This is what is meant by divine unity. This is its fundamental principle. That's Baha'u'llah. I think I said it was Abdul Baha. Ergo, can we not conclude then that the cosmos ontologically replicates to the extent possible all the dimensions, powers, and attributes of the metaphysical realm, including unity of organization, unity of purpose, and unity of being? In short, from what I'm saying, it is metaphorically, at the very least, effectively the body of the spiritual world, or the body of God, and as much as both realities are but expressions of the nature of God. Finally, I have a presentation about why an autonomous, self-sufficient being or creator would think it a good idea for essentially spiritual beings, we who are the fruit of his creation, to endure an experience that is ostensibly contrary to our nature. And of course, as we've said at the outset, very painful these days. But for the answer to that, we must go to the hadiths of the hidden treasure to discover why such indirection is not just a good idea, and this is a very important concept, but a process that is absolutely essential to the Creator's purpose, including the reason why this physical replica of the divine reality must be infinite, rather than being confined to a single planet or solar system or galaxy cluster. In other words, it's not only a good idea, it's the only way for the Creator to bring about exactly what he wants to bring about. And as I say, that's something that's a very lovely discussion to have. So thank you very much. I'm ready to take any questions you might have about this. Let me stop sharing my screen and I will let Alex take over from here.
Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. Dr. Bashir Elahi, would you like to say anything?
Well, I'm just really, I can't express my thanks and gratitude to Dr. Hatcher. I am convinced he has encouraged every one of us to really investigate our own reality. This is really something that all during his talk made me wonder and astonish more and more, you know, about this reality of human being, that what a blessing is to be a real human being. Thank you so much, Dr. Hatcher. And we are going to come back to you very often. I can say that very much. Thanks again, really.
Oh, my pleasure. Alex, thank you. You're very kind.
Alex, you're the one.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. And we have several questions in the chat, and I wonder if we could start with a very straightforward one, which is for those that are looking to learn more about tonight's topic, do you have a book or two that you recommend? Maybe one that's an official Baha'i writing written by Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha or Shoghi Effendi, as well as one written by one of the non-central figures of the faith?
Well, as you saw, I was pulling my talk from a whole lot of different sources. So there's the best place to start with any understanding of the faith, insofar as a coherent discourse about the central concepts of the faith, is the Book of Certitude. It is the principal doctrinal work of the Baha'i faith, always will be. And that's the best place to start if you want to read the work of Baha'u'llah It's not easy reading in some places, but I have written a book in which I've outlined the totality of that work called The Ocean of His Words. In that I have a full outline of the entirety of the Book of Certitude. Insofar, again, I jumped over so many subjects, I can't really think of, just one or two works that would do. The next work I would recommend would be Some Answered Questions, and be sure to get the revised version of it, because there's not a great deal of astounding distinctions made in the new translation. It's just better. That's all. It's taken care of any of the ambiguities that were made in the first translation. But Some Answered Questions is virtually a Baha'i encyclopedia of philosophy and theology. It's a fantastic work, and it's so well indexed, and also and these were table talks, so all of them are very bite-sized discussions. Table talks Abdul Baha gave at the end of the day. So that would be another. Then there are many works by many Baha'i scholars, but insofar as my own work is concerned, on this particular topic, I would say The Purpose of Physical Reality and The Ascent of Society would be the two that would be most relevant.
Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. Our first question comes from, or our second question there comes from Nader, who writes, Alaupa, and thank you for the great presentation this evening. What is the most effective way to discuss with people who disbelieve in God with the loving intention of helping their soul towards its creator?
I would go back to what I said about Baha'u'llah. I mean, if you're talking about a loving way, then a philosophical argument, let me put it this way. My brother did a wonderful job in several different publications of a scientific proof of the existence of God. So that would be a good place to go if the person is so inclined. However, this has symbolic logic in it, and it's not easy to follow for someone who is looking for a loving relationship with God. On my own personal response to that is the same thing I said about Baha'u'llah. If you want to get to know God, establish a relationship. One of the sort of somewhat amusing, I hope amusing, retorts I give sometimes is if I told you someone in Tanzania loved you very much and wished to share that love, and you didn't believe it, how could I prove it to you? Well, I could talk about how wonderful this person is and tell you all the things they've said about you and so on. But the only way you're really going to believe it is to talk to the person, to get to know the person. And since we've just discussed that the only way to get to know God is through the manifestations, then the best thing to do is to start a relationship with the manifestation. And so I would say, try some prayers. In fact, I remember my brother had a best friend who loved the idea of the faith, loved the logic of the faith, but didn't believe in God. And so my brother challenged him, said, just do this for me. For the next week, pray this prayer every night and see what happens. And the result was, I don't know if the person became a Baha'i, but it had a dramatic effect on the person because the prayers do have an effect. So, I mean, it's sort of like, I say, if you want to get to know God, you have to do the same thing you do in getting to know anyone. Establish a relationship, talk to them. Let's see what they have said to you, because what God says through the manifestations is for everyone. So the hidden words is a good start, the synthesis of all the spiritual teachings of the past, to get a sense of the love that God has for us. Noble he has created us. You know, I guess, you know, one of the most incredible hidden words in that sense is, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. That's a very powerful axiom, because basically it says this person wants to love you, but if you're not receptive, that love cannot, you know. And again, if you raise children, you know, so deeply and sometimes painfully, however much you want to show your love for that child, if the child turns away and is not receptive, you can't impose love. It has to be received. Well, that's too wordy an answer, but maybe gives you an idea of what I'm talking about.
Thank you. I think we can all, for the parents among us, we can all relate to that.
Yes, can't we?
The next one is a quick one from Audrey, who writes, will the chart shared tonight be available to us? And especially the one that shows the timeline of the life of the sun.
Absolutely. Where is up to you, Alex, but on my the YouTube channel, that not the one that has the courses, but the other one, the Dr. Hatcher's talks through the years. Do you know that one?
Yep, I can go ahead and post it into the chat here in just a moment.
Okay, yeah, go to that one. It'll be there in a few days, and it'll not only the talk will be there, and the PowerPoint will be on the YouTube, but I will also include a link for the PowerPoint itself. So you can just download the PowerPoint if you want.
There we go. It's in the chat right now.
Thank you.
And then our next question comes from Jane and Rob, who write, if man existed before the terrestrial world existed, and if the form of life...
This terrestrial world.
Yep. And if the form of life adapts to different environments and over time to any planet, then is man a term that refers to beings with souls, whatever physical form they might have?
Yes.
Well, that's a quick one.
In my opinion, how could it, you know, the definition of a man is a being capable of knowing and worshiping God. And to do that, one must have a spiritual essential reality. Remember this, that the beginning of human life, according to Baha'i definition, is when the soul associates with the human body during the process of conception. And so you don't have the soul emanate from the realm of the spirit or from God until you have a being capable of utilizing that capacity. So when we were in some, minuscule form of our evolution, did we have a soul then? I don't know. I suspect not. I imagine that the soul associates with the human being when the human being gets to a point that it has the capacity to utilize it. And this is sort of gets into the thing of, do dogs, don't let Bear hear this, do dogs have souls? People want their pets to go with them to the next world. And of course, Abu Baha famously said to a lady who said she wanted her little dog to go with her, and he said, the dog will be there if you need it. Which my understanding is, you won't need it, but you can't appreciate that now. And the dog would have nothing to do there because it wouldn't have a physical body and it wouldn't understand anything that was going on. So I presume when a being on another planet gets to the point where it can utilize a soul, the soul will emanate from the realm of the spirit, associate with that being. And that being is by definition a human being.
So it has nothing to do, what I'm hearing from you, it has nothing to do with our chromosomes or our gender, anything like that. It's strictly our relationship.
I guess you'd have gender in order to replicate, but I mean, we know that in the next world we have no gender. All right. So I mean, yeah, it has. But again, these are my speculations. They're just logical deductions. They're not something I know about that you don't know about.
Excellent. Well, and our last question for this evening.
Is it something about where do you get off? Does it start like that?
Oh, no. Sorry, we do have 2 more questions.
Okay.
Sorry, our second to last is from Madeline, who writes, the speaker on a previous night asked, if I drink and drinking is against the law, what happens to the individual in this world, and what happens to the individual in the next world as a result of their drinking?
Well, they won't be able to drink, that's for sure.
It wasn't
so. They'll probably go through a lot of withdrawal, I would suppose. Yeah, in other words, if you're asking the generic question, do we suffer consequence for our violation, or for our willing violation of things we know to be wrong or to be right? In other words, for our willful, sinful acts, moral negligence. And of course, the logical conclusion is we begin there where we leave off here. And the more we refine our character here, the more that transition will not only be painless, it will be, as the writings say very clearly in Gleanings, it will be such a joy that the human tongue can't describe. Now, this doesn't mean, now this is something very important. The Baha'i writings make it very clear that we aren't relegated to some stasis, some static condition in the world to come. That even though, and this is a quote from Abdul Baha, even those who have died in sin and misbelief may become changed. And it says they can become changed by the prayers of others and by their own prayers. For in that world also, they will have the capacity to supplicate God for forgiveness and so on. So we know very specifically in the writings, it says we will become aware of what we have done, as there will be an assessment as we leave this world and go to the next world. We will be made aware of, I presume, the good things we've done and be pleased, and the bad things we've done.
This topic has been discussed by Corey's, at least I know, twice, and we are going to come back to that also.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Alex, do we have any other?
We just have one question to wrap up the evening, and that comes from Dr. Neil Porter, who writes, thank you, Dr. Hatcher. Pantheism is the belief that God and the universe are one. How does your specific view of the body of God relate to pantheism? And that'll wrap us up for the evening.
Sure. Pantheism does not see God as a distinct and independent or autonomous being. Pantheism believes, again, there are variations in pantheism, but it means God in everything, that everything is infused with God. There's a difference. Things can reflect the attributes of God, but the essence of God is independent from a Baha'i belief, is an independent, autonomous being whose attributes are reflected in things, but the essential reality of God is not in things. In the same way that your soul associates with your body, but your soul is independent of that body. So your body reflects maybe how your soul is doing, but it isn't your soul. Well, that's not a good analogy, actually, to a certain extent, but it is if you're going up the chain of being a bit. So yes, we believe that everything in creation has the capacity to express an attribute or to represent an attribute of God. And that the higher up you go on the chain of being, the more you have a spiritual reality to something. But it's not God in essence. It is simply an expression of God. As I read in that very important passage, we believe that God is an actual being, independent of his creation, aware of his creation, and assisting his creation. So it's quite a different thing from pantheism.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hatcher. Again, I can't thank you enough because you have given us such a guideline. You know, I think about from different dimension, guideline to our purpose of our life, really. And I think you have written a book about the purpose of life. I think if I read some years ago, if I haven't forgotten that. Is that correct? You wrote
the purpose of, yeah, the purpose of physical reality. Yeah.
Physical reality. Yeah, this is one of the most important things that any human being can do for himself or herself, really. And you touch so many aspects of that tonight. I can't thank you enough for this, really.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
It's really, anyway, on behalf of all the people, I know people, I thank you very much and wish you the best in these difficult times. And we are going to come back and ask you again and again. Rebecca, are you ready? Did I catch you? Rebecca Jalali? Okay, if Rebecca is not ready, Alex, could you please say a prayer for us?
Yep, one moment. Magnified be thy name, O Lord my God. Thou art he whom all things worship, and who worshipeth no one, who is the Lord of all things, and is the vassal of none, who knoweth all things, and is none of none. Thou dost wish to make thyself known unto men. Therefore, thou didst, through a word of thy mouth, bring creation into being, and fashion the universe. There is none other God except thee, the fashioner, the creator, the almighty, the most powerful. I implore thee, by this very word that hath shone forth above the horizon of thy will, to enable me to drink deep of the living waters through which thou hast vivified the hearts of thy chosen ones, and quickened the souls of them that love thee, that I may at all times and under all conditions turn my face wholly towards thee. Thou art the God of power, of glory and bounty. No God is there beside thee, the supreme ruler, the all-glorious, the omniscient, Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much, Alex. I have to really acknowledge the work that Alex is doing for us, and also Dara. These two wonderful, wonderful individuals make this Friday night fireside possible, really. And I thank them very, very much, really. Now, Alex, is all yours.
All right, everyone. For those that have joined us before, now is the time. We'll allow everyone to unmute themselves, and you can say hello and good night.
Dr. Nasser, I couldn't say anything because the speaker was off. We were all muted.
Oh, sorry. That's from me then. I didn't turn on the permission to allow you to unmute yourself.
Sorry, next time, Rebecca. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. I really enjoyed the fireside. Thank you, Dr. Hatcher.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Dr. Hatcher.